Sample surveys in the real world. So far we've discussed what a sample survey is and how important it is to avoid sources of bias. We talked about some sampling schemes that invite bias, the voluntary response sample and the convenience sample, and then we also introduced the simple random sample. A good sampling method will have random sampling at its core. How do sample surveys look in the real world, however? Let's recognize a large problem. We've already recognized this problem previously. When we're trying to study a population where we can't get a list of all the population elements, say all working mothers in the United States, then we settle for the largest list possible that we think is a good representation of the population. We use this list then to take our sample from. The list of population elements that we actually draw our sample from is called a sampling frame. The ideal setting is when the sampling frame is a list of every population element, but oftentimes in a realistic setting, in the real world, the sampling frame is not a list of the entire population. There are other issues in sampling as well. After attempting to recruit the chosen members of your sampling by sampling from the sampling frame, there are still problems. Consider the following example. We've already talked about Pew Research and how they're very transparent in their data collection and also how they adjust for bias in their estimates. They do a lot of research in the field on best practices in taking surveys. Here's a quote from a recent article. The link is above in your lecture notes if you'd like to read the whole thing. Where the 1997 rigorous study completed 1,201 interviews after making 31,385 calls, the 2003 rigorous study completed 1,089 interviews after 72,485 calls. Of the 2,626 respondents who began interviews in both the standard and rigorous samples, 282 or 11% broke off the interview at some point prior to the last question. Of these, our interviewers were subsequently able to persuade 115 to complete the survey, while 167 were never completed. What's happening here? I'm sure this is very familiar to all of you. I'm sure you have heard someone in your house, it might have been yourself, telling a telemarketer, please take me off your list. Lots of us don't have time to take surveys. We're very busy. This issue is called non-response, and non-response is an enormous issue. It creates all sorts of bias. It's expensive and takes strategy to conduct surveys. There are many issues to resolve in the process of collecting responses, and we want the most accurate and truthful representation of our population possible. Polls may claim a simple random sample, which avoids bias, but with a small margin of error and the random sample, is that enough? What are some pitfalls to avoid? There are two main types of errors that happen in sampling. Number one is your sampling errors. These are the ones that are caused by the act of taking a sample. The second main branch are the non-sampling errors. These are the errors that are not related to the act of selecting the sample. We're going to cover sampling errors first. Remember, these are the ones that are caused by the act of taking the sample. This happens in the sampling process. We have two subdivisions here, A, random sampling error, and B, sampling methods. Random sampling error is an error we have already discussed. Random sampling error is the error that's accounted for in the margin of error in a confidence statement. Random sampling error is the error that we recognize is always going to be present due to sampling variability. This is the deviation between the statistic and the parameter. That is, how far off is this statistic from the parameter in general. This is caused by chance in selecting a random sample. This is the only error accounted for in the margin of error in a confidence statement. So we already recognize this error. We're now formally calling it random sampling error. And this is the one that comes from sampling variability, which is always going to be present. The second subdivision of a sampling error is your bad sampling methods, and we've already discussed these as well. Convenience and voluntary response samples are two examples of bad sampling methods. We also have introduced a new bad sampling method by having an incomplete sampling frame. When you have an incomplete sampling frame, it can cause undercoverage, where certain groups of the population are left out. Let's say that you're using the telephone book as your sampling frame. This is going to leave out all those who don't have a landline. And we would say we are undercovering the population. The types of errors that we haven't discussed yet are non-sampling errors. These are errors not related to the act of selecting the sample. So this is everything outside the act of selecting the sample. We have processing errors, which are mistakes in data entry or arithmetic. This is why lots of times we like our interviewers to take tablets out in the field so they can immediately record the data, so we don't have transcription errors. Data entry or arithmetic errors are problematic and very common. The second type is poorly worded questions. Poor wording can introduce, again, bias. We're going to have an example of a poorly worded question in just a moment. Our third type is response errors. Response errors are when you get a response from somebody but it's incorrect. It either could be because they don't remember the actual answer or they're lying. When you ask people about their weight, we oftentimes get response errors. Lots of people fudge what their actual weight is. If you ask somebody about their medicine and how many times a day they take it, they might not remember. So bad memory is also a problem. Also, there could be what we call interviewer or respondent bias. That is, we tell the interviewer what we think they want us to say. The fourth type that we're going to discuss is non-response, and this is the one we mentioned previously in this set of lecture notes. Non-response is when you fail to obtain a response from an individual selected for the survey. You could have non-response on one question or several questions, or you could have non-response where the person selected for the sample just chooses not to respond at all to the entire survey. So our example on the poorly worded questions is, we asked this question twice with two different wordings. First we asked it, is our government providing too much money for welfare programs? When it was worded this way, 44% said yes. When we rephrased and asked, is our government providing too much money for assistance to the poor, only 13% said yes. Now the interviewers were trying to get at the same thing here. But you can see that changing the wording drastically changed our estimate. What happened here? The word welfare has a negative connotation. And so as soon as we use the word welfare in our question, we immediately biased our estimate. So we want to stay away from words that have negative connotations. It's actually really difficult to word questions in a way that doesn't invite bias. There are actual professional question writers for surveys and also for educational testing, like for the SAT or GRE.